Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our Diversity in STEM series. We're going to go ahead and kick off our session. Some of you may have joined us last year for the first iteration of what diversity in STEM looks like. But this year, we're bringing even more. All right. And this morning, we're going to bring even more excitement, conversation, and hopefully action steps for all of you as we talk about what diversity in STEM looks like. Let's see here. I promise you, we are really good at tech. I promise you. So, joining us today, you're going to get to hear about really the impact of legislation. This session today, we're talking about not just the Supreme Court legislation, which a lot of people have been discussing, but we're also going to talk about how that impacts anti-DEI legislation on the state level. And hopefully, you guys have lots of questions because we have a great panel of experts here to discuss and talk to all of you about the impact. So much so is that Dr. Dickerson is at Florida International University in a state that did actually pass their anti-DEI legislation to give perspective on how that has impacted the state. And I'll introduce the panelists when we get there, but I just wanted to let you know you're in for a really good discussion today. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Beth McNeil to welcome us from our regional chamber.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Whitney.
No problem.
And I'd like to thank Whitney and Delano for the vision of diversity in STEM. This has been a labor of love for a long time, and it was nice to be able to start this partnership and bring the business community into the topic of diversity in STEM, because the goal is to highlight the disparity, but to bring the business community and bring jobs and make sure that we're finding solutions for the topics that we're going to discuss in the series. Now I think we're going to take a peek at our agenda for the day. So this is where, or the morning I should say, we're not here for the day, but this is our agenda, and please feel free, discussion. Stay with us towards the end of the program. This is where we're going to have a deeper dive. If you've been with us last year, we ran out of time for questions. It was such a robust event, every series last year, that we decided deeper dive would be a great opportunity to allow folks to ask questions and the panelists to dive deeper into the work that they're doing. So this will be your opportunity to really roll up your sleeves and ask our experts some questions. So again, founding partners and Delano and Whitney have been the subject matter experts and really the wind behind all of the sails for diversity in STEM. And we'd like to say thank you on behalf of the Chamber. And if you haven't met Delano, Delano is here running all of our tech. Thank you. And we'd like to thank our supporting partners as well. We have the African American Chamber. We have Briston and Gregory here. And Alfonso was not able to be with us, but the Hispanic Chamber is also a supporting partner. Now I'd like to welcome up our host for the day. And thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for having us. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Dr. Aja Marie Johnson, and I am a postdoctoral researcher for the Rose Lab. On behalf of the Rose Lab, we would like to welcome you to the Innovation Corridor. The Rose Lab stands for Removing Obstacles in STEM Education. Again, my name is Dr. Aja Johnson, and I'm the postdoctoral researcher. The Rose Lab, we focus on removing obstacles in STEM excellence. We're located in the Innovation Corridor, specifically in the 18 Digital Futures building across the way. And we're focused on mostly creating opportunities for students of color and students with disabilities to be able to engage in STEM at an equitable level.
Poverty Collaborative of CPC Cincinnati. The CPC was a collective impact organization designed to lead the community's planning and implementation of efforts to ameliorate poverty by providing guidance on public policy, employment, housing, transportation, education, and healthcare concerns. Dr. Bankston is known for collaborating and engaging others for the benefit of changing cultures, organizations, and communities to meet individual and group needs. She played a key role in the development of the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber's Agenda 360, Diverse by Design Committee, having served as its first chair. As an advocate, she played a role in getting state legislation changed for distribution of medication for the charitable pharmacy established by St. Vincent de Paul and was a member of its founding board. She is founding chair and former member of the board of the Center for Closing the Health Gap and was intimately involved in the formation of this organization. So thank you and welcome Karen Bankston, PhD, who uses her knowledge and her experience to make a change. We love it. Next, we have Robert L. Bell, Director, Hamilton County, Economic Inclusion and Equity Department. Oh, there we are. He is on screen visiting us. We are having a hybrid event. Thank you. He's waved. You see him, and he looks lovely. Thank you. In January 2018, Robert Bell was appointed by county commissioners as Director of Economic Inclusion for Hamilton County, Ohio. His initiative called BOLD, Building Opportunities by Leveraging Diversity, is being implemented countywide to ensure inclusion and diversity becomes a priority in county operations, hiring and staffing, as well as in county procurement and purchasing practices. Roberts brings significant inclusion experience in Hamilton County. He headed the HUD-mandated Section 3 jobs and economic inclusion programs for the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority, CMHA, for over 7 years. He brings additional experience in program management, service effectiveness, economic development, teaching and training, and contract compliance from previous positions at Beach Acres, United Way of Greater Cincinnati, and the University of Cincinnati. Robert was named the Economic Inclusion Advocate of the Year in 2016 at the Midwest Regional Environmental Sustainability Summit. In early 2017, he received the National Merit Award for helping residents lift themselves out of poverty through the National Sherwin-Williams Painter Training Program. And later that year, his Building for the Future program was nominated as a national best practice by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and was awarded the National Award of Excellence by the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials for his success in helping minority and women-owned businesses grow and prosper. Please welcome Mr. Robert L. Bell. Thank you. And up next, also virtually, sitting there eagerly waiting to be introduced, we have Daryl Dickerson. He's an assistant professor of mechanical and materials engineering at Florida International University. His technical research focuses on transforming multi-scale biomechanical and mechanical biological insights into biomanufacturing processes, enabling the creation of personalized, fully functional engineered tissues with a specific focus on inclusive science and engineering. This work connects to Dr. Dickerson's broader vision to make engineering spaces more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive, which includes education research focused on faculty-driven institutional transformation. He has served as the chief executive and chair of the board of directors of the National Society of Black Engineers, expanding the strategic focus of NSBE's pre-college initiative by founding the Summer Engineering Experience for Kids, or SEEK, as it's also known as, which has served more than 30,000 students since its inception. After completing his PhD, Dr. Dickerson founded Advanced Regenerative Technologies, I'm sorry, my tongue is tying here, to translate his academic benchtop work to clinical practice, leading to the introduction of bioenthesis, and hopefully I said that correctly, bioenthesis, a rotator cuff tendon enthesis repair product currently in clinical use. He has also served in the board of directors in the National Association of Multicultural Engineering Program Advocates, in a network of change agents focused on advancing diversity, access, equity, and inclusion in engineering. In 2022, Dr. Dickerson was awarded a National Science Foundation Career Award entitled Harnessing Multiscale Biophysical Cues for Engineering Adult Heart Tissue to advance his inclusive research and education efforts. We can please welcome Dr. Daryl Dickerson And as you see, we have a panel of quite some talent and knowledge. Pretty amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introductions. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. And I'm excited to moderate this panel because, as you hear, our work all intersects and directly aligns. And so I'm going to go ahead and open the panel just for those in the room that might have questions. I'm going to open with a question, but this is meant to be a discussion for you all as well. So at any moment you have a question, please raise your hand. We will pass the microphone to you so you can ask your question to the panelists. We want to make sure that you leave here with your questions answered as well, even though I do have a prepared set. So to get us started, I'm going to ask about the big question. Why is it even important to talk about the anti-DEI legislation when we're talking about STEM access? Why do we care about this anti-DEI legislation? And I don't want to call on you if you want to speak, if you go for it, but that's the big question. Why do we care? Go ahead, Dr. Bankston.
Well, you know I can always talk. So, I think that when we think about, or at least when I think about this new legislation, that it seems to be proliferating across our nation, I begin to wonder really how sincere, and I don't want to seem like I'm being belligerent or anything, but how sincere we are related to the principles of the founding of the United States. And I say that because a lot of the legislation that is being proposed or have been proposed and implemented is the antithesis of what it is that we say the Constitution of the United States and its founding is all about. Having said that, I would be remiss if we didn't bring to the table the notion of the changing numbers of individuals who live in our country anymore. What do I mean when I say that? I'm a baby boomer. You probably couldn't tell that, but I am.
I thought you were a millennial.
Stop. But baby boomers, let's just look at this from a very foundational kind of perspective. Baby boomers didn't have a lot of kids. So if you think of your grandmother or your parents, we didn't have a lot of kids. I only had two, which is what we were saying that was happening in the United States. It was 1.5, 2.5, depending on if we're talking about the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. So baby boomers didn't have a lot of kids. So the generation behind us, Gen Xers, are smaller, right? Now I'm talking people who were born in the United States when I say that. So the generation behind us is smaller. And Gen Xers didn't have a lot of kids, right? Some Gen Xers had no children. And then we move on, and we're starting to see the new millennials, in the late 20s, starting to have some kids. But the fact of the matter is, the U.S. born population has shrunk. So we've got that issue. Second, we have been debating the whole notion of whether or not we allow or disallow people who come from other countries to come to the United States to live, work, and grow, right? And that has historically, I'm not talking about how they got here, why they got here, that's not the issue, but historically has added to our population, right? So now we have proposed legislation, etc., that says, well, we don't want any immigrants, even though this country was based on the whole notion of immigration. So when we hear people say, and I hear it every day, we don't have enough help. I don't care what industry you're in, there aren't enough workers, there's not enough workforce. We find it's because we did it. We did it in terms of the population. So when I think about it from a STEM perspective, we know that means that we need individuals who are really strong in math and science and things of that nature. And then we think about smaller populations and economic challenges, education not to par to meet the new needs that America is going to need into its future. So for me, the legislation does not pay attention or has not paid attention to all of the environmental influences in our country that have impact on individuals being able to work and live and grow and play and go to college or go to tech school, wherever they're going. We haven't paid enough attention to that. And I believe that is one of the issues that are going to get in the way of our being successful at this long term, and why we all need to be concerned about diversity in STEM.
Thank you. Daryl or Robert? Daryl, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just um, add to what was just eloquently stated. Like the legislation that is being put in place is intentionally restricting access to opportunities for a broad swath of students, but particularly those who have been historically excluded from the opportunities of education, higher education, and then access to higher paying STEM careers. And so I think that's the crux of this. So when we think about what America is supposed to be about, what the United States states the the founding principles and the ideals of this country are, is that, if you're within this country and you have the opportunity to be as great as you want to be, and you have access to the public systems to allow you to reach your goals. But what we know is that structurally within the United States, that's just not the case, right? We know that historically it has not been the case, and we don't have the systems in place to be able to get there. And so the DEI structures, programs, policies that have been put in place are pathways for us to work through those structures, or navigational paths that have been put in place. And what's being done with this anti-DEI legislation is to knock away those paths, to make more restriction to the opportunity that the US is supposed to provide. And in doing so, then it actually reduces our economic competitiveness, our global competitiveness, our political acumen as a country. And so all of those things come together. And if we take a step back and try to think about this logically, the result should be that, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense for us as a country. It doesn't make sense for us economically. So why are we doing it? And then we should then ask our questions, what is the reason? What is the true reason for this being put in place? And I think we're going to have more discussion about what that true reason is, and then how we navigate that.
Thank you. Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't really add much to what the doctors said, because that's actually true. I was just thinking as we were talking that, even in me, I think I was being a little bit idealistic with thinking that this would not happen again, because it historically has happened every time. Since the end of slavery, civil rights movement and everything, these are called backlashes, and they're common in this country. And we just have to understand that I used to think, well, I won't have to go through what my parents went through. Yes. But that's not true. And I think I should get on myself for believing that. You know what I mean? Because they went through a lot. And we owe them. We owe them to address these backlashes and these anti-DEA legislations, and continue to push forward the progress we have made. We have made the commitment we are not going back. You know what I mean? I know I have, and my friends have, and everybody I know has, who are in this field. And we have to just be persistent and diligent, and refuse to go backwards at all.
Thank you. I will say that there was a point in the answers that we touched on economics, right? It was sprinkled in all of these responses. And I'm going to push this back to you, Robert, and kind of go in reverse order. But what is the economic impact of this anti-DEI legislation?
Well, it is horrendous, because we've already suffered the economic impact of just not being a truly diverse country, and not allowing all parts of our community to develop to their fullest potential. We've been suffering that impact for hundreds of years. It's going to get worse, because we have made some headway in a lot of areas, and we will strive to continue to do that. But you can't even put a numerical number or a cost on the kind of impact that will occur if we do not continue to pursue opening and the diversity that we've achieved, and really getting all parts of our community and our country, all residents, the opportunity to exceed to the best of their ability, with all the resources and support that they should have.
Daryl.
Yeah, so I think about this at both the micro level and the macro level, right? So let's talk about the micro individual level. So we know that education is a pathway to economic prosperity because the higher your educational degrees, the more opportunities you should have in place. And you know there are racial disparities that are associated with that, as well as gender disparities. But generally, you know, when you have more education, you have more access to be able to be prosperous in your life. And that has an effect on your life and your children's lives and you know, future generations. And so when we restrict the pathways of individuals to be able to achieve educational success within STEM fields, then we're highly restricting their ability to be able to be individually economically successful. On a broader scale, when we're thinking about within the United States, macro level economics, and we know the need for STEM jobs. We know that there is like this large need of STEM professionals at all levels, and we're not graduating enough currently. We cannot graduate enough with the individuals that have been historically in place because the demographics of the country are changing. And so if we're going to meet the needs of STEM careers within the next 10 years, then we have to have a broader swath of individuals who are getting STEM degrees. It's as simple as that. And so by putting this anti-DEI legislation in place and limiting the ways that we have over the last 40 years been able to, at the very least, make incremental progress with getting diversity within engineering and STEM more broadly. And we're saying that we are giving up on this idea that, you know, we have these pathways for individuals to get to STEM degrees. And that's going to lead to a lot more need. And we're not going to be able to fill that need. And with the anti-immigrant nature of the country right now, we can't go outside of the country in order to fill those needs. So we're really creating this this strong issue where we're not going to be able to actually do the work and be technological leaders within engineering and STEM more broadly.
I love what you just said, and I like the approach of looking at it from a micro and a macro perspective, because I think that's exactly the way the strategies need to be considered. When I think about this particular question related to economics and the impact of STEM fields on the economics, I think immediately of the whole notion of capitalism. You know, some people kind of like think it's a dirty word. It could be a dirty word all you want to, but that is the foundation of the economy in the United States, is capitalism. And with it comes rights and rules that organizations and individuals are allowed to operate under that have an impact at both the micro and the macro level. As he was talking about, you know, having the right number of people going into the programs in order to be prepared for the jobs of the future. Now, if we think about historically, and I'm not even going way back, I'm going like to the 1970s, all right? I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. And in 1970, when I graduated from college, the steel mills closed. 1977, September the 1st, 5,000 people lost their jobs on that day. We as a country, because that then started happening all over the country. It wasn't just Youngstown, it was every place, right? Wherever there were steel mills. But we as a country were not prepared for the next level of technology that was beginning to be developed. So subsequently, let's fast forward through into the 90s. You know, we have all these, you know, computers didn't come to the 90s. I always tease people that when I went to graduate school, I was on a typewriter. We didn't have no computers. But all of those things came into the 90s, and guess what? We didn't have people who were prepared in the United States to do that. So we allowed for, supported the immigration of people from other countries who were ahead of the United States as it relates to technology, right? Then we said, wow, what has happened here? So we began to refocus the education. If you recall, in the 90s, in the first part of the turn of the century, lots of changes in the educational realm as it relates to what science and math was going to look like, K through 12, and then post-secondary, in preparation for what we finally had opened our eyes to And that was, we hadn't prepared our society for this new technology. So now here we are. And this legislation, and I'm just going to talk what I know about here in Ohio, has not only implications as it relates to who has access to programs and whether or not they have funding for their programs, it also impacts or has implications for the higher education workforce. Some of you may or may not know that. I know there's some faculty in here, they know this. They know that the legislation that's been proposed puts limits on what the faculty to Dr. Gaskins and others, I said, I feel like I'm gonna have PTSD because a lot of the things that we're talking about today, we talked about when I started college. You know, this is like we're repeating ourselves, and do we not learn from those things that we did in the past?
So you brought up how states across the United States are starting to introduce this legislation, which is why we're excited to have Dr. Dickerson here with us, because unfortunately, you're in a state that has successfully passed anti-DEI legislation. And we would love to hear from you. Can you tell us how that legislation passing impacted you and the work that's happening in Florida?
Right. So let's talk about the contours of legislation, because I think it's really important to know that the legislation has some broad parts to it that deal with the idea of having individuals who are dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion on campuses, so that staff, programs, and offices, whether or not one has DEI training in place in order to deal with the many often unintentional and unconscious biases that lead to and reproduce the structural issues that we have in place, whether or not one can ask for diversity statements for hiring, and also affirmative action programs generally. Unfortunately, in Florida's anti-DEI legislation hits all four of those areas. It's a statement that the state funds cannot be used for DEI programs, offices, and staffs. There cannot be mandatory DEI training. We cannot request diversity statements for hiring purposes, which was a standard before for FIU. Where we would ask for diversity statements for any faculty candidates, and there can't be affirmative action programming. And so I think there's the immediate sort of effect. So when we first started talking about this, or this was first sort of in the ether, we'll say a couple of years ago, there were whispers about, well, you know, this is a phase. So this is going to pass, because this is going to eventually just go away, because these things come in waves and people get loud, and then it goes away. But we're past this point now, was the common refrain. We are past this point now. And let me just tell you, we're not past this point, because now we have this legislation that has been signed and in place. Here it's Senate Bill 266. And what it did initially and immediately was to have a chilling effect on you're thinking about your work. And so my work sits within a technical space, but also specifically within the diversity and inclusion space. And the questions I ask are, can I actually do my work here? Meaning, can I do the kind of research that I was promised I could do within this space? And to a certain the legislation that's in place, the restrictions that are in place are ultimately a distraction from the profession. These are distractions from the actual work that we should be doing. They're taking away mental energy, physical energy from the real difficult work that needs to be done. And when you have that distraction in place, then it leads to less effective outcomes. If I'm worried about how I'm saying the things that I'm saying, then I'm not worried about the relationships that I'm supposed to be building with the teachers and the students in order to make sure they have the support that they need in order to do the work. And so all of this leads to a more ineffective system. It leads to us not being able to actually work and focus in the ways that we should. And so that's my specific example, but more broadly, at the institution. So we have an office that is the Office of Advancing Women, Equity, and Diversity. All those words are bad. Advancing women, equity, and diversity. That's not, really great within the confines of the framework of SB 266. And so they were federally funded. So it was an NSF grant from a National Science Foundation grant that provided funding specifically for this idea of advance. And they're at the end of their time with the advance grant. And so the funding is going away from the federal funding is going away, and it's supposed to be institutionalized. Like this is built in order to institutionalize things. But we now have in legislation the fact that you can't spend state funds on this thing that's supposed to be institutionalized. And so they're now trying to figure out a way of how do we exist and how do we report back to the National Science Foundation about the things that we're supposed to do. When we built this great infrastructure, they have some great programming, one of which is the bystander leadership training and bringing forth ways that faculty can think about, how do I look around and make sure that I can use whatever sort of whatever my position is, I can make sure that we don't see bias on at the levels that we do. But now that's likely going to go away the next year because we don't have the resources to be able to support it, and it may be illegal. All of these things again take away from the advancing of the institution to making it better, to actually meeting and the ideals that we espouse. And so it's really frustrating to be within this sort of system and have to try to navigate that when I actually just want to do my job. I'd like to just be able to do my job, and what I was promised when I came here.
I want to just say for our audience, if in case you were not aware, in the state of Ohio, it's Senate Bill 83. And Senate Bill 83 passed through committee yesterday and should be going to the House today.
Today, they're going to take it up
to
for
see
vote
whether
today.
or not, and it has very similar statements as he just described, including that universities can't have women's programs, LGBTQ programs, race, ethnicity, religious programs. All of those things would be illegal.
I just want to point out too that the strategy is very clear. Last week, they said the bill won't pass because we don't have enough support. And those who were monitoring that bill started to relax because they were like, okay, we don't have to continue to apply pressure to not pass the bill. And as we started to relax, and they think, oh, it's only impacting higher education or it's only impacting education, it will filter into your workplace.
If they have state funding.
If they have state funding.
It's all about the economics.
It is. If you have any type of state money coming to your business, even if you're a vendor, okay, right? That counts. You would not allow to have employee resource groups. Just that's one big thing that I'm like, I hope everyone is paying attention, because yes, it directly impacts higher ed, but it filters everywhere. And in that vein, people are asking, well, what do we do? And so I'm going to ask the panelists, are there any strategies, practical strategies, that institutions of higher education, industry, anything that we can do when we're in this culture? Like, what is something that we can do?
Well, I'll say something really quick, because I'm going to defer to the doctors on this, who know a little bit more, a lot more about this than I do. But I know in Hamilton County, we have just gone through a major journey just to get our first required minority and women-owned business purchasing goals. We've never had that in 80 to over 100 years, and we just went through a 2-year period to get it. And it's really disconcerting to see all this stuff happening now. Because we're still in the process of implementing our disparity study recommendations, and the disparity study is a best practice nationally that really looks at spending over a 5.5-year period, who you spend it with, and how much, and that kind of thing, versus who are the businesses in your relevant market area that could be providing this service. It's called utilization versus availability, and if you find a significant statistical disparity among the uses of minority and women, you are given what's called a compelling governmental interest to do recommendations and to resolve those issues. And that's what we have been putting into place. So, I mean, it's very worrisome and disconcerting that, we've got this far, because we're now seeing some really major improvements in our spending, which was really nil for those groups for 8 or 100 years. And we're seeing some significant improvements in that, 10 times as much year per year. And that could all be greatly affected. And within those areas are a lot of STEM kind of activities: architecture and engineering, environmental services, health services, medical services, all that kind of thing. And I'm not sure we know really what the strategy is, but I know we're going to have a comprehensive strategy that we all pursue in order to be able to counteract this and keep this progress going.
I think the part that saddens me, I'm with you, Robert, on this, and that is that we've spent so many years, anyone who's done, particularly the whole efforts around inclusion and diversity, and incorporating women in spaces, incorporating Black people and Hispanic people, and just all of that we've spent so many years, and I think that in many ways we got comfortable because we thought we had gotten past it. But with the stroke of a pen, our lives can be changed with the stroke of a pen. Now I'm going to say, because you asked for a strategy.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know that I have the answer. But what I do know is that we have not, as a country, paid enough attention to who our elected officials are. The fact is, this is my first time in my life, and I'm old enough to have been participating in the civil rights movement and that in the 60s. This is the first time in my life that people aren't respectful of truth, and that people aren't paying attention to science. I'm a nurse by background, and this is I've seen lots of pandemics and endemics and all of those things over the last 50 years. But this is the first time that I ever heard people say that physicians and nurses and scientists didn't know what they were talking about, and that somebody who has no education related to that had the better answer. So I was on a conference call the other day, and we were talking about the whole notion of the 2024 election. Lots of people are going to be running for election, re-election, and all those kinds of things. Are we paying attention enough and putting enough pressure on individuals who will have the ability to use the stroke of their pen to control our lives? Are we paying close enough attention to ensure that we are voting in the right people? We have not done a good job the last few years. We have not. We've been very apathetic. When you look at the percentage of individuals in our communities who are voting or not voting, it's very sad. It's very sad. And the difference between now and, let's say, 1963, 64, 65 through 68, everybody was voting. Everybody, whether you were for it or against it, everybody was voting. We don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. And so subsequently, people are getting into office that, I said the kids, where they don't have a clue. You know, they don't have a clue, and it has serious implications for everyone, not just some people, serious implications for everyone. And so I think beyond registering people to vote, because that's what everybody always say, we got to get folks registered for, that's great. And I think that communities have done a great job registering people to vote, but we need people to vote. We need people to vote, and we need them to understand what's going on, what they're voting for, what the implications are, how it's connected, et cetera. Because I don't think that, well, I know that I've spoken to people about Senate Bill 83 and they didn't have a clue. I'm like, well, it's about to change our lives if that thing passes. It's about to change. Yes, it does impact higher education, but not just higher education. Any organization receiving state funds or federal funds through their state can be held to these new rules.
And I will say, Senate Bill 83 is only one of the bills. We actually had a forum yesterday at the University of Cincinnati in the College of Engineering and Applied Science. The provost came, and there was a question from the audience about a different Senate bill. Was it 183? 183, which would restrict the use of bathrooms for transgender people. And it's passing.
Yes.
So now people are going to be restricted on where they can go relieve themselves in their workplace. Like, I can't even, if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures and you remember in the movie, Katherine Johnson had to run over a half mile, it was actually longer than that, to go to the bathroom every day and then come back. And in the movie, the thing that I'm disappointed in is you saw that, I think it was Kevin Costner's character, hit the sign down and was like, yeah, you can go to the bathroom here, you're an employee, whatever his endearing speech. That never happened in real life. The whole time she worked there, she still had to always run to the bathroom. Do you know why they added that to the movie? They said when they tested it, white guilt was so high that they couldn't tell the truth because they knew it would upset audiences. So we can't even tell the truth in a movie about what really happened. She never was allowed to go to the restroom in that building. And we're doing the same thing right now to transgender people for we don't even know what reason. People are just attaching legislation to things that I don't even, why do you have time to care about where someone goes to the restroom? But they do. Yes.
They have too much time.
Way too much time. I'm like, I'm way too busy to care about restricting access to other people. Like, what are you guys doing every day that you live your wild, oppressive dreams? Yeah.
It's
Astute, and you've spoken and addressed now a couple of times as far as the state funding and the federal funding. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like and where those funds are actually being penetrated from and going to within private and public organizations?
Did you hear her question online? She was
Not
asking for
completely.
actual examples of the funding restrictions that if the bills were to pass, and then Daryl, you could probably talk about this, like how it is restricting you in Florida. What are practical examples? Like, where do we see these state funds, those restrictions, and how that could hinder business?
And the second part is, and then are we voting against those individuals who are passing and regulating those particular funds, or is there a way from a strategy and a strategic standpoint that we can be a part of that process so to not enable that to go?
Well, let me ask that latter part. Many of the people that are on these committees and the ones that are currently in the State House that are voting in favor of these committees just got elected. So they've got a few more years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's too late for the ones that are already there, but we've got an election coming up in 2024, and there will be people that are going to be running in 2024. We need to be knowing what they're talking about now. Give it back to
Yeah.
them.
We gotta follow the money, right?
That's
We
right.
have to follow the
You gotta
money.
follow the money. That's
Do
right.
either of you know how the restriction on state funding, some actual examples of how that could impact our state?
So I can give a quick example. Our office of it's the Center for Diversity and Student Success in Engineering and Computing is its name. So it's a Center for Diversity, right? they're actually one of the major ways that companies are able to go about recruiting students, developing relationships with students for internships so that they can eventually recruit them to work. And without that structure in place, then there isn't a great way for companies to be able to reach in and do the recruitment of students. So it will cut off the ability to bring in new talent to companies. And I'm not sure that folks actually recognize that. This office is a mechanism, or these offices are mechanisms by which we're able to make the connection between companies and students for their professional development and eventually matriculation into jobs. And so without those offices in place, then you lose that connection. You have to create that in some other way, but the institution is not necessarily set up to quickly be able to do that. And that's just one example.
A non higher education example here in the state of Ohio, there dollars from the federal government are sent to the states for the purposes of education, K through 12. And the state of Ohio has decided and determined that there will no longer be a Department of Education. So we are no longer having a Department of Education. The governor will appoint someone to be over education, and then the decisions will be made that way. A second type of state funding that has implications for construction vendors and things of that nature. There have been dollars that have been appropriated through the state's budget for women-owned companies and minority-owned companies, et cetera. Those dollars that have been appropriated, those line items will be eliminated because it will be against the law to appropriate dollars in that way. Now, and it's already been controversial for nonprofit agencies who have in recent decades received state funding to support certain programs, whether it's the transgender education to help parents in terms of are at risk of losing those dollars because they come from the state.
So think about programs that are for girls in STEM. Think about your employee resource groups. Think about anything that you have that is actually considered a best practice in your workplace that might be for a certain demographic. If you have targets, I think about construction a lot because I think about how we have targets on minority business or women-owned business being vendors of even our construction companies. And how we have a failing infrastructure right now in the United States, that a lot of money is going to rebuilding our infrastructure. All of those initiatives would have to go away for you to be the vendor on a project. What does that look like then? Because there are real issues about just in that industry, construction industry in general, about diversity. And so
Looks
for
like
them,
1950.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're going
Yeah.
really far back, right? Like the way that the legislation is written, it's going really far back. Now, do I think that was the actual intent of the law? Maybe I'm underestimating people, which could be it, but I don't think so. But the way they wrote it, it will have all of these residual impacts. And I don't know if they were even thinking about how deep it would go, because a lot of the legislation was introduced because there's a notion that education is indoctrinating people to be more liberal or changing their viewpoint. And that was scary because the more conservative you are, the less and less people are subscribing to those beliefs. And that is really scary. And so it was really about how do we restrict that from happening. But then the way they wrote the law, it just has all of these residual impacts on industry and economic impacts that we will have a hard time overcoming. Even if the bill is only around for a few short years, it has huge repercussions. Okay, I have more. I want to wait to see if there's questions from the audience before I keep going, because we're having great discussion. I do see a question. I'm going to come with the microphone so those online can also hear you.
It's not a question, it's just a comment.
Well, go ahead and make your comment too.
And then I might be overly optimistic, but first of all, thank you so much for everything you're offering all of us. What I wanted to say is don't give the ability to strip our mental space, like one of the speakers was saying, um, and don't let it go wasted on these sensitive matters, because we should be able to get our power back. You know, that backlash that you mentioned earlier, it's time for us to resist and rise. I mean, and it sounds like the Palestinian attitude right now. You're going to resist and resign. And what's happening is the minorities are a majority. So this is going to collapse on its own. You know, you're only showing your true face when you're doing that. And I do think with time, this will affect those with that inferiority complex who are trying to make us more conservative or less educated. So that's all I wanted to say.
I think you're absolutely right. That's why I mentioned about the 1960s, because I know most of you all were probably kids or not here yet. But everybody, when I said everybody was on that forefront, all right? Everyone was for the fight for the rights of people in America. And it was that kind of coming together. We're not quite there yet, because I think that because the bills haven't been, at least in Ohio, because the bills haven't been passed yet, the implications, we don't feel it, because we are a community of people in our society that deals with our emotions and how it makes us feel, the fears that people have, which is why they're behaving in the way that they are. I think the more that we can have community dialogues like this, where we're really talking about it and thinking about it, the more perhaps able or willing we are to come together to do that stand up and fight. Because this, you know, again, I'm old enough to remember that stuff. You know, I didn't see it on TV, I was here, you know, and it's very frightening. It's very frightening. And we've got a lot of states that are just marching along in this same direction.
I think Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong, 22 states that have introduced in, how many?
40 bills in 22 states have been introduced. And I want to, come back to that specifically and talking about action, right? So
Yes, please.
it's really critical to know that there is a strategy out there of the opposition, and they are relentless. Like, there's a national movement to put these things in place. If you look at the bills, there's like the text of the bills are very similar across states. And so
Yes.
recognizing that this is a coordinated action, and later I'll give you a website to look at where the coordinated action comes from. And know what the impact is, know that this is regressive. So we are going back in time unless we are, really coordinated and making sure that these things don't pass. And we need to know what the extent of the legislation does. We know what it does and does not do. And I think that's really important. Some folks will freeze themselves and not to do things, thinking that legislation said something, or the Supreme Court ruling, for example, said something that it does not. And so being very clear on what these things are supposed to do and what they don't do, it's really important. If you're talking to legal, so your legal team about these things, it's really important to ask them the question, how do I do what I want to do? Not if I can do something. You're not paying them to simply tell you yes or no. You're asking for their legal advice to be able to do the things that you would like to do. And also look at the other things that are on the books, because there's some contradictory laws that can be in place that, may be able to help you in your efforts. And Florida has some great examples of contradictory laws that we are currently using to be able to push forward.
Thank you for your answer. I have a similar question. Is there a coordinated response happening from the business community? Is there an awareness? Is someone sounding the alarm within the business community to activate what's needed? Because it needs to be relevant. I came here just looking for information. However, this is very alarming, and there should be some strong response from our Black and brown and minority and women-owned business community. Is there an intentional opportunity? Because access in this state to state contracts and federal contracts is solely dependent on that diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if we're not pushing to sound that alarm, what happens to not only our macro Black businesses, but our micro Black businesses, those that exist in the sub-economies of class. There's a really, really strong, those businesses that take care of maybe themselves and one other person. Those people are going to suffer the most because they are the most marginalized. So is there some response that is happening in our community that allows us to ring that alarm?
Great question.
Yeah.
Karen, Robert,
Yeah.
Daryl?
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I really don't know, especially about a concerted effort, but I do know that it's going to have to. The only way we're going to survive is to make sure we create one that's community wide, that's persistent. I mean, it's like the group All in Cincinnati around women issues and stuff like that. We've got to address this this DEI infiltration. We have to deal with it as consistently and as steadfastly as they are. To get it in, we're going to have to deal with it to keep it out and to get rid of it. And we're going to have to become more vocal about it and talk about it more and bring up and be more transparent about who's pushing all this stuff, and make sure that information gets out there. But we all of us are going to have to get more involved in this, or we're all going to suffer.
I think we have to learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time. You know, when I talk and think about, because I appreciate your comments, because most of the minority-owned businesses might have themselves and one other person. Most of them don't have any employees at all. But when I think about this, I know that everyone is so focused on, because of the economy and all those things, they're so focused on just getting their business done, that these kinds of things are often tangential to what it is that their main focus is. And so we really have to learn how to chew the gum, walk at the same time. So we know we're going to still be at the tables where they're talking about new development as an example, and the construction and getting these contracts at the same time that we're understanding the strategies that others have clearly put into place, that is just marching across the United States. I have a bad habit of reading news online. It's a really terrible habit. And what's terrible for me is I read those ugly comments that are after the article. But what it has done for me is really helped me to understand some of the feelings and ideology of people who live in this region. And so I always share it with my friends who are in the legislative bodies here in the greater Cincinnati area. Say, look, did you know that there's like this group of people over there on the east side that this is what they're saying? And didn't they come up with their anti-DEI stuff at the school board out there? So we have to be diligent, and does it mean that we're going to do a little something more than what we would ordinarily do? Probably so. And are you saying, I'm so tired, I work all day, I understand. But if we are really serious about some of these things, then we have to get out and make those extra steps, because I am not aware of a coordinated effort locally as it relates to this stuff. I'm not aware, and I'm pretty up to speed on stuff. I'm not aware of that.
I'll pass it to Delano in a second, but I want to say that the struggle with why we don't have a coordinated effort, you would think that people would want to come together to have one, is that this is almost to a fault. We're more optimistic. And so people are like, I remember ringing the alarm almost, I don't know when that was. I think I called Daryl upset, right? Like everything was, I'm like yelling. I'm like, Daryl, oh my gosh, is this happening? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like trying to get people together. This is why we're even doing it today, right? This diversity in STEM series today. People are like, it's not going to pass. For some reason, for some reason, which is also a good thing, guys, we are just optimistic about people. Like, oh, they would never do that. And I just want to tell you, they will. So please listen and let's, even if they never did it, what would have been wrong with us getting together to have a plan just in case they did? But we don't do that. And that's honestly been the largest problem.
I just want to give a quick comment and actually related to the point the sister made. But I think one of the things, and I shared this, Dr. Gary May, who's the chancellor at California, Davis, he made a strong statement when the Supreme Court issue, and I send it to people I know are in faculty, like, is your president standing 10 toes down like this? Because if you look at a lot of the statements from the presidents, they weren't strong. They were kind of wishy-washy. And I want to read one quick paragraph. This is from Michael Drake, who's over the entire University of California system. It said, "We are disappointed." The first 3 words from the president is, "We are disappointed in the Supreme Court's decision to bar the use of race in college admissions, a valued practice that has helped higher education institutions increase diversity and address historical wrongs over the past several decades." That is how he led. So I think the point is that we assumed that everybody was on our side in this. So one of the issues we are facing, or are going to face, is that a lot of the companies didn't want to be doing this. They were dragged into this space where they just were doing DEI work for show. So I think one of the questions I will ask for Daryl, and Whitney probably can chime in as well because she works on campus. How much of the reaction do you think is based upon legislation, and how much of the reaction is based upon people who didn't want to do this stuff anyway and are using it as an excuse to get rid of programs?
Oh, Delano.
Yeah, that's deep. Go ahead,
You're,
Daryl, you
you're,
go
you're,
first.
you're opening up some cans. But let's talk about this because I think there is certainly like there's a large element of how academic institutions work that's based on compliance, right? I will comply with what is put in place because I am restricted in some way from getting what I want, and if I don't comply, then I won't be able to do the other things that are important to me. And so I will say that I think a large portion of institutional administration focuses on compliance, and once a compliance barrier is gone, then that's out of their mind. And so it's not an issue of addressing historical wrong for them, which it was the point of affirmative action. Let's be very clear. The history of the United States, the way we are structured, everything that we see today is the result of how things were set up at the outset. And so the issues that we have with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice were built into the system and are still within the system. And the purposes of all the DEI work is to undo that structural bias. Folks don't actually care about the structural bias, or there are a large number of folks that don't care about the structural bias. They care about being in compliance. And so the response, I think, has to be, let's make them see that they are now still out of compliance in some way, shape, or form. And so that goes back to the point of getting the right people in place with the political power to be able to put forth what we think should be the right DEI infrastructure that is compliance, that forces people to do the things that we need them to do. Let's also have these kinds of conversations as a community and make sure that educational institutions are very tied to their communities so that the community knows what goes on campuses and can also provide additional pressures to those within higher education. Because without that, then we don't see the kind of action that we should see. But Dylan, I think you're absolutely right there. I think there's some folks that this is actually a mission of theirs because they see the importance. There are others who are just working within the compliance framework.
I will say, for those who are like, how real is this? If actually was the Supreme Court ruling passing, there were institutions that fired their diversity, equity, and inclusion officers out of their college. If you, and corporate teams too, in those states, that's key number one to let you know if they were actually in it because they cared or if they were in it for compliance. Because I'm going to be honest, the Supreme Court ruling had nothing to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. It was
Nothing.
literally about race-based admissions. So that's when I made the joke earlier, like people are living their wildest oppressive dreams. But that was a way to tell because the bill had nothing to do with diversity outreach programming or offices, but they took that as a step to go ahead and release people from their workplace. That was your hint number one, that not everybody was on the side of care.
I think that that whole notion of compliance versus commitment is what we're talking about.
Yes.
You know, I shared this with Whitney and Delano back, you know, when President Obama came, everybody, every company, everybody was getting a diversity officer. And I have some friends that have gotten those jobs. They're chief diversity officer of XYZ company, whatever. I said, you all better watch out for those jobs. Okay, watch out for those jobs because I've been a hospital CEO and here's what I know. I was committed to it and trying to change a culture to get everybody else, some few thousand people, to also be committed. What I learned is that everybody wasn't committed. Now, they said they were going to do it because I made it a policy. So they complied. But the whole notion of commitment means you've got to change. There's got to be that change. And in order to ensure that that cultural change begins to happen, there has to be an environment of accountability. And that accountability says if the behaviors of individuals as a part of your organization do not align with the values of your organization, what are you going to do? Do they get to stay? I'm doing some work with a hospital system in Cleveland, and they wanted me to coach one of their surgeons who was out of the box. And I said, well, I can certainly do that because one, does he know that he's going to be coached? Okay. Two, is he open to being coached? Yes, he's a surgeon. And three, when I tell you that he's not open to being coached and he got to go, are you going to let him go? Because I know he does surgery and surgery brings money to hospitals in case y'all didn't know that. So are you going to be willing to hold him accountable for the negative behavior that he presents in the operating room with the nurses in that operating room? Well, Karen, you know, we're not going to be able to. I said, well, then I don't want the consultation. Because if you are not willing to hold people accountable for the change, then all you're doing is complying. You're not committed. You're not committed.
Absolutely.
That's a bar.
So I have a question for all three of our panelists because this is top of mind for me. So I get point of personal privilege with the microphone. In 2020, there was a wake of we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion because we all unfortunately watched the murder of George Floyd on camera and the world was at a standstill. And there was nothing but rallying support about correcting wrongs and getting us to a different place. That was only 3 years ago. What happened? What happened? How did we get here? How do we go from rallying support around DEI to this? And you might not have an answer, but I would love to hear your thoughts because we all have been in this space. That was literally only 3 years ago.
Well,
Go ahead, Doctor.
No, go ahead, and I'll jump in
But
afterwards.
just on a global level, again, we were idealistically thinking that was going to solve all our problems, and that these other parts did not exist. But I'm here to tell you, they always exist, and they will always exist. You know what I mean? But you know, and they go in waves. I mean, you know, that's our historical of this. That's the history of this country. That support goes in waves. But there's still a lot of people in this country that feel like there's not enough resources for everybody to have what they want. And that's the cultural piece of this whole capitalism thing and of this country. You know, that they're not willing to share all the resources. And you know, we're idealistic thinking that, you know, when things start going in our favor a little bit, that we've arrived, but we got to understand that it's always going to be like this. It's always going to be up and down. But we've got to have the commitment like our forefathers did and our parents and grandparents did, that we will not accept anything less than what the values of this country say is freedom for all.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So it is really important to note that anytime there is progress, there will be a backlash like that, because that is the history of this country. So we know that it will happen. I think Florida is so interesting in so many ways, and the Florida public system is really interesting because in 2020 there's a memo that was released by the State University Board of Trustees talking about the commitment that we have as institutions to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and listing out the strategic priorities of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Florida higher education system. The state released this. And now 3 years later, we have on the books anti-DEI legislation signed into law and being executed by the same board of governors. Like the dissonance is incredible. There cannot be like starker differences in what you wrote in 2020. I think it was November of 2020 when they released this, and what they're writing November of 2023 right now to be able to implement the anti-DEI legislation. And so I think it's in part incumbent upon us to not only recognize that the backlash will happen, but really consistently remind folks of what they said and what they promised they would do, and to make sure that they are at least aware of how utterly ridiculous it is for us to be in this state at this point 3 years later, when 3 years ago, just 3 years ago, not even an entire presidential cycle ago, you said that you were really committed to this. You said that this was critically important to you, and you were going to put resources behind supporting change that should be in place because of something that we all saw and witnessed that was horrific. And you recognize that should have been a flashpoint to really make change. And so I think we have to remind them of what they said, what that time was like, and to also remind them that what we saw in 2020 was horrific, but it's been going on for a long time, and in many ways continues at different levels today. And so the restriction of opportunity that you're currently putting in place with the anti-DEI legislation and the policies and practices on campuses and beyond are creating even more divides that, if you would just do the right things, we could begin to heal.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bankston.
When you put it in the context of the years, it's like, yeah. I think that we unleashed a group of individuals who were willing to stand up, right? In that 2020. But what we didn't do was take it to that next step. I can't emphasize enough the importance of ensuring that you elect the right officials, because there were elections in 2021. And during those elections in 2021, we turned over a lot of the seats of individuals who would have agreed with what we're talking about today. Poor Florida got a new governor, and with the stroke of his pen, he started fighting Disneyland. Whoever would have thought? I mean, you're going to fight Disneyland, but my point is that of the things that we have that are a part of the fundamental structure of how this country operates, the electorate process is one of the ones that has the biggest ability for us to be able to make a change. And we do not, as a country, as a society, operationalize our rights. And a lot of people died to get those rights, right? A lot of people died to get those rights. I mean, we have cities that were blown up, all kinds of things. But we do have them, and we do not exercise them. Again, when I listen to some of the rhetoric that individuals spew out, I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? And it kind of, makes me angry because growing up, we were always told, you go to school, you get a good education, work hard, all that. You all know that, right? Not really knowing at that particular point in time that there were people that didn't have to do that and still got the same thing that I got. So now we're at that place where here are all these people that don't have the same thing that I have, and they got more. And we're all acting like that's okay. So I don't know. I think that there is that fear, that backlash is grounded in fear of what they believe is going to happen. I did some research back before I retired, and the foundation of the research, the concept is called the kitchen table. So it's the theory of the kitchen table. And what the theory of the kitchen table is about is saying that all of us are part of our lived experiences and our lived journey. And that at that kitchen table, you for lunch or breakfast or dinner, you ask questions like, how was your day today? What did you see today? Well, did you know that grandpa said, and all of that, what do you talk about at Thanksgiving dinner? What did you talk about at Christmas dinner? And all of those kinds of things play a part in the way that we behave, think, and make our decisions and our values, right? And so I think that what's happened and what happened after 2020 is that everyone began to focus on those things that were important to their small piece of the world. This whole notion of inclusion and belonging, and I think belonging is the one that we really need to talk about because we don't have any of it. But that whole notion of inclusion and belonging went by the wayside. People certainly were focusing, everybody got all these jobs, the DEI jobs, etc. But most of it was around this whole notion of fairness, whatever that looks like for you, but not inclusion and belonging. And that's gotten in the way, I think, of being able to move forward.
Yeah,
Thank
if I
you.
can, I
Yeah,
want to go
go for
back
it.
really quickly, just build off that point and Mr. Bell's point from before. We are really in I don't know, we set things up within this country as though there isn't enough for everyone. Like this scarcity mindset is really damaging. And it's part of, why this is being driven forward, because we're thinking that there isn't enough for everyone. And there's some people who don't deserve things. But I deserve things more than these other people don't deserve things, although I don't talk to these people and I don't know them, but I think I deserve them more. So I have to make sure to restrict their access to things. And we got to deal with that. Like, there's no reason that we all can't be successful and we all can't be prosperous. There is no reason whatsoever other than how we construct society. And so we have to make some decisions about, what this looks like and how it can change so that everyone can feel like they can be prosperous and not at the expense of someone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's no sense of belonging.
Yeah.
This whole being inclusive, we're not really, because you might get something that I'm supposed to have. So I'm gonna keep you over here. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining the panel today. It was a great panel discussion. I just want to say we value your insights, your thoughts, and thank you for giving us so much information today. So round of applause for Dr. Dickerson, Dr. Bankston, and Mr. Bell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I am going to pull up some slides because we do have a spotlight that we want to discuss as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We do want to spotlight something that we are doing in the state of Ohio, especially here in the city of Cincinnati. I'm going to bring up Delano White to talk about the Women of Color in Tech initiative that we have. So, Delano.
So I was asked to talk about this initiative. So we are one of the partners on this program. This partnership actually is in partnership with the JP Morgan Chase and Company and Google. and it's led by the chamber. So I'm actually filling in for Jessica Wright. And so this initiative, there are actually 4 organizations that were asked to partner with the chamber and JP Morgan and Google to actually work. They're giving out 500 free certifications to women of color in Hamilton County. And there's 4 organizations involved. We are one of them, along with the Urban League, the Community Action Agency, and Brighton Center. So the goal is to increase economic mobility for women of color in the region. So again, we're excited to be one of the partners in this initiative. And each organization holds different advantages to participate. So one of the benefits of our program, because Whitney's actually studied this and actually does work around this, we actually offer childcare services. So if women need childcare services while they're doing their certifications, we're in Digital Futures, so we open up our space where you can come into Digital Futures, and we'll have childcare services while you're there. So this is a great initiative. They're giving out 500 free Google certifications, and from what I could tell, people are really jumping on this opportunity because I think they had like 300 people sign up almost immediately. So if you are interested, the QR code is up here, and share that because again, I won't get anybody in trouble, but every time that they have asked for more certifications, they have boosted that number. So sign up early, have your friends sign up, and then if you hit that number, maybe ask for more because Google they've been willing to train people. So it's a great opportunity. So I can ask questions about the program in general, about how we're offering program, and then if you're interested in working with one of the other 3 organizations, I can actually connect you with them as well.
And on the screen, you can see what certifications are listed. So if you're wondering like, well, what thing can I learn? They're listed here under the certifications offered. So you have options, which can put you in a whole different career trajectory. So excited about this initiative. So now we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. There are refreshments in the back, coffee. We're taking a 2-minute break. We're going to go into our deeper dive Q&A session for those who have some burning questions. I think we started in the beginning. There were times where we were hosting the series that people are like, I really need to ask more questions, or I really have more thoughts. And so this time is dedicated for you all that are like, I really want to talk to you about this thing. And so we're going to have the space open for a little bit longer for those who still are noodling on some things and might want to have someone to talk to about it. So if you are not in that space, you're like, I don't really have any questions, you don't need to stay. But for those who do have questions, who want to engage in deeper conversation and connection, please, we're here for another hour.
And I do believe Robert has some data
Oh, yes,
to
and
kick us
Robert
off in the session. So-
Robert does have information that he will be sharing for that deep dive session. I have it up. So he'll be
Yes,
ready.
absolutely. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have your slides ready, but we'll be back in about, I did not mean to do that, in 5 minutes.